A bit of a forward before this video begins. It is going to be a two-part interview because we had so much to talk about for 0K. If you guys want to know more about 0K, then you came to the right place. I want to say a big thank you to Shadow Fury 333, also known as Dominic. He let me use some of his videos. His YouTube link is in the description down below. He casts a lot of competitive 0K videos. Really awesome. Thank you so much for letting me use them. And then we got Indie Ire on YouTube. Again, his link is in the description down below. He is also known as Ultima Ratio on Discord. Thank you so much. And also GoogleFrog for letting me use his YouTube videos as well as providing me with screenshots. Thank you so much. He's also known as Frugal Grog on YouTube. His link is in the description down below also. So thank you guys so much for sitting through this. Please enjoy the interview. Hello everyone and welcome to another Still Speaks video, and we are very lucky to have someone from the 0K development team. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, I'm GoogleFrog. Been working on 0K for a while. I like RTS.
Great. I think we love RTS as well, and we even like a little bit of 0K, and we are interested to know more about it. So tell us about 0K. What is it about?
Yeah, so basically 0K is a real-time strategy game with roots in Total Annihilation and about 15 years of development from the community. It's an open source thing, which is quite different actually. Lore-wise, it's about these massive robot battles, but it really doesn't take itself too seriously or try to justify itself in lore. It's just sort of an excuse to have some big battles or small battles, depending on what you want to do. So really what it's about base building or expanding across the map or making armies with a large toolbox of units and abilities. I guess what it's about to me is it's having a game that combines so many of the ideas that you find in, maybe older RTS or RTS which you don't see much, or ideas that really you don't find in RTS much at all. So part of it's taking wacky ideas from the 90s and fixing them up and polishing them so they actually work. For example, 0K, not from the 90s now, 0K is often praised for the power of its UI. So you might be aware of like line, move, and area commands as you've might have seen them in bar or PA. So yeah, that we have those, and they come from the Spring Engine, bar, and 0K. But also that's just sort of scratching the surface on what the powerful UI is. Yeah, but this is a whole sort of design thing. You can't just port this UI anywhere. You have to make it work within the game. So half the work is the technical side of making this UI, then the other half of the work is the design, which actually even supports it. I guess another example of what it's about is about sort of versatility. We support 1v1 to 16v16, and in the sense that the game is fun and doesn't break at those levels. Although some people won't like 1v1, some people won't like 16v16. Yeah, so we scale from small games to sort of big epic games where you're just one front on a massive massive battle. Yeah, so that's loosely what it's about. I guess we'll get into more later.
Wow, yeah, I've noticed those line movement things. I really like those. I like the way that it tells you where your units are going to be before they arrive there. That is a really great addition. I enjoy that quite a bit myself. And big battles, who doesn't like those? I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, and I'm happy that they're actually seeing it more, right? It made its way into PA eventually.
It did.
Which is great, I think.
I think that's great. I think we need more of that, honestly. Like, that is just something that's been missing from like the Supreme Commander series, in my opinion. I mean, that I love those series. Clearly, I'm on this channel and I do this, but yeah, I think those are great. So let's move on, shall we? 0K could be compared to Total Annihilation and the Supreme Commander series. What makes your game stand out from those?
To me, 0K and Supreme Commander are sort of evolutions of started at TA and then chose to focus on different aspects, go in different directions. So So 0K focuses more on units and unit diversity. And we find the army is the most fun, so that's what we've focused on. So we've got a wider array of unit designs, while having most units fit in some kind of class structure of Rights or Assaults or Raiders, etc. But there's a lot of diversity within each class. Also, from the launching off TA, we really lean into the physics-based approach, balancing the game with a lot of turn rates and projectile physics. So, tanks turn slowly. That's important for making the slow projectiles hit them. Zippy small robots can dodge the projectiles. This is sort of what the balance is based on. And yeah, I think we found the sweet spot of unit responsiveness and physical simulation, which makes it sort of quite controllable and also deep. For example, units don't even shoot through each other, which is the difference between maybe TA, but definitely Subcom. The target AI deals with this fine, and it's really good for disrupting the sort of blob mentality you can find in a lot of RTS. Not so much this sort of subgenre, but more like blobs in StarCraft, right? Units can shoot through each other, so they just blob up. So yeah, we've got interesting units with roles and things like that. We've also got whole factions based around things like, factions based around things like jump jets or personal cloaking or personal shield bubbles. So we've played really a lot in this design space. It's actually a bit of being compared to something like Red Alert 2 with the sort of craziness that some units can have. So that's sort of the first thing is, focus on units. The second thing, which Subcom doesn't really not do, but it sort of doesn't do by default, is this principle we focused on, which is fight the enemy, not the game. Basically, if you've got a repetitive task that doesn't involve decisions, doesn't directly interact with your opponent, we tend to design it out of the game. So we have a two-prong approach for this. You don't design mechanics that would just basically result in tedious tasks. You just don't put them in. And then for other tasks, we make the UI powerful enough that people can easily communicate what they want to do to their units, even if it's a sort of repetitive thing. For example, we have commands for the conceptually simple orders of fight at your maximum range. So you can tell a unit to do a type of attack move where, if an enemy gets closer to it, it moves backwards. Just like if an enemy gets further away, it moves forwards. This is really simple, but it allows people to then, push in with these units and then maybe command a different battle instead of really have to jink back and forth manually all the time. And this isn't to so much remove micro as to give you more options as to where you do your micro, because you're probably going to be making better decisions about exactly when to move forward and backwards than this simple command would. But it lets you have that choice, in a sense. And it lets us balance the units around what they can really do, rather than, how capable people are of using them. So we can have the balance be more uniform across lots of skill levels. And, for example, we've already seen the conceptually simple command of move to this line I just drew. That's a very simple command to sort of think about. And also economic things like, when stalling, prioritize this construction. You could go through your base and pause and unpause things, but you're not making decisions when you're pausing and unpausing. You can preload the decision of this thing should be built before these other things, and we can just do that. So yeah, that really brings me back to Subcom and the idea of focusing on different aspects of TA. To me, Subcom has become bigger and more economic focused than TA. It moved the number of tech levels from 2 to 3. It probably reduced the number of factories and units in each tech level, although maybe TA didn't actually have many viable factories and units. I'm not sure about competitive TA. And yeah, it's really a game about, you know more about Subcom than me, but as far as I can tell, compared to 0K at least, the focus on Subcom is wrangling this economy that's buffeted from all sides by everything. Expanding makes it unstable, taking up makes it unstable. And there's a game to this as a skill, and it's really a big management. You're building this war machine that is outputting troops, and you're fighting lots of areas, which is good. But we want to focus more on those fights, on picking which units and using the units. Yeah, so that's about it. Those are the two big differences, perhaps. There's a few more, but it goes back to those two, I reckon.
Okay, so you're more focused on the fights and then the resource management, or am I not interpreting that correctly?
We're more focused on having an interesting selection of units and then using those units. There is still, of course, you still have to expand and choose where to expand.
Right.
And tech up, in a sense. Not quite tech up, but, escalate the game. But we focus the micromanagement, if you would, on the units. You're going to be paying attention to your units and what they're doing.
Got it.
And really focusing on them. The economy doesn't entirely run itself, but it doesn't require your input to not fall over all the time.
That makes sense. So it you don't need to micro your macro, as they would call it, like really focus on upgrading mexes. You would just, you would have your own way, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, your way of overdriving the mexes, correct?
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Okay. I really like the idea of telling your units to, kite the enemy, like stay maximum range from the enemy while, you could fight another battle. And I also like the idea of the prioritizing of what you could build when you're like starting to stall. That's really, really cool.
Yeah. And we keep this intentionally really simple. So kiting doesn't look at all the enemies around and decide which way to go and do all this stuff. It just says, okay, closest guy, move away from him if he's too close. This means that when you give a command, you know what the unit's going to do. So that's important for actually making them controllable and responsive. If the command was, win this battle for me, well, your units could do anything. You don't know what they're going to do. It's really about having your units do what you think they're going to do. Of course, with a bit more complicated UI, you've got to learn what they're going to do, but we try and keep it as simple as possible.
I like it. That's really, really cool. How many people are on your development team?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question because there isn't quite what you call a development team. So it's an open source project, which is probably at the more extreme end of like community integration and disorganization. So there's no company or studio or salaries or much of a structure that's written down anywhere. People do things based on spare time and motivation, mostly. And it's worked pretty well for about 15 years. We've been really iterating on this for that long, and it started off as a multiplayer game with people playing multiplayer, sort of built by the community. So active developers are players to some extent, and all the developers started as in the community because there's sort of nowhere else to go for them to come from, right? There's no external hiring or anything. People who come in and try and be developers, which hasn't happened all that much, without playing, just sort of don't have a foundation and sort of lose interest eventually. So there's some structure, of course. We've got Steam, so there's a handful of core developers and a website and a server. So there's some core developers with access to things like the Steam store and pushing builds and things. And I tend to shoulder the responsibility for most of the underlying game itself rather than the infrastructure and things working. So I can be a bit of a bottleneck for contributions sometimes. Because I know that if something breaks, it'll be either technically or in the design. I'm probably going to have to fix it. So I have to sort of balance that up as well. So yeah, that's why it's a tricky question. I guess we've probably had something like 25 people who were in the core developer role filled out, sort of filtering in and out of the project from around about 2007. I've been around since then, as has Litcho, but most of the other core developers I can think of. Well, there's also King Raptor, who's now called Histidine. He's been around since then. But yeah, most of them are filtered in and out as they, life comes up, they have different priorities. And this is before even counting the map makers, the engine developers. It's heavily weighted towards 2007 to 2010, because that's when we were doing the main fork that then turned into 0K, where the foundations were being laid and we had to do lots of technical stuff and lots of the design work, where things were really, really crazy back then in terms of what was in the game. We had to fix quite a bit of it up, especially the interface was crazy. It was just widgets being thrown at the interface as really community members and some developers, which it was a very blurred line, would make them. And then we had to fix that all up over the subsequent years. In terms of contributors, probably a few hundred, maybe 1,000 contributors. There's a credits list, which doesn't quite cover everything, but it'll be a lot of models here or there, or mostly models. A lot of the models came from bits of the community. I put the sounds in from other open source games. So yeah, it's a big mix. This sort of, the development sort of, well, dipped a bit in the last decade. The original core developers came less active maybe around 2014. As things died down, there's less sort of fun stuff to do in development, right? You couldn't just put crazy systems in anymore and see how they went. You couldn't add whole factories and just go crazy with them. So around about then, Litch and I headed the Steam release and pushed that. But we had more developers come in, so there's a whole AI community where people were basically trying to compete with each other to make smart, non-cheating AIs. So we got one of those, and that's now in the game. And now we've been busy with other things mostly. So the original question was, well, what? How many developers are there? Probably about half a developer. Half a like full-time equivalent developer at the moment is probably our capacity. Yeah. And that's spread amongst a bunch of contributions that come in. There's mappers and there's a bit of infrastructure work.
So what you're saying is you don't have any real full-time developers. You just have people have a chance to work on it. They do it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've had more chance in the past. So there's never been full-time developers, but sometimes people with lots of spare time.
Okay. So mostly like hobbyists.
Yeah, I'd say like entirely hobbyists, essentially.
Entirely
even back
hobbyists.
to the engine developers.
Really? Wow.
Well, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this game is made of entirely hobbyists, just everybody just pitching in since it's open source. So here's a question everyone probably wants to know. How much does this game cost? And are they any microtransactions?
Well, this is, relevant to the previous point. We sort of barely have the structure to even have money. So most of the contributions over the past years, the licensing for the models is really messy, but it was basically, all from the Spring community in the the spirit of free and open source software. So we couldn't really charge that, I don't think. The licenses are very, unclear. There's people saying, have this. Some of it's public domain, some of it's Creative Commons, whatever. So I don't think we could charge anything, especially the music is, first of all, non-commercial. Yeah, it's Creative Commons, non-commercial, something or other. There's an exact license in the credits. So yeah, there's no specific license for much of the stuff, but the game basically has to be as free as it gets because we don't know what to do with money if we had it. It would take people to manage what the money people are doing, right? You hire some modelers, you have to manage the modelers. That doesn't sound like a very fun hobbyist thing to do. And we couldn't really have people pay for it because all these people who contributed think it's going to be free. The server, although, the server is run on donations, and we do reward them with minor, like hats, like alternate skins for commanders, overhead clan icons. So there's some small things that people can get with donations. So that's, sort of a microtransaction, which makes the server run.
Okay. So the game is absolutely free, and it's ran on donations out of the kindness of the hearts of the players, correct?
Yeah.
Well, if you guys need something to do, there's a free game called 0K out there, and they would love to have you. So, I think you mentioned Steam, but where could people play 0K?
Yeah, that's right. There's Steam and there's a portable installer from itch.io. The portable installer is basically just an exe that downloads its own stuff and then downloads stuff and then runs it. Steam's probably the best bet because it's got a good automated build system. It comes with a bunch of maps. It's rather than you downloading the maps whenever you need them from the server. So yeah, Steam and the auto update is actually quite good. The build tools for Steam, I've been quite happy with them. You can push a build. It make sure things are up to date. We basically disabled the auto updater feature of the portable, and that's the Steam version. And we've had some problems with, trying to recreate all the auto updating outside of Steam. Of course, it started off outside Steam as a portable thing until we went onto Steam. But now that's on Steam, it's much more stable, in terms of updating on Steam. So we sort of recommend that. But, there's standalone portable stuff. You'd imagine, being open source, it is always run on Linux. And there's all this portable stuff. So that makes Linux people happy.
So could the portable people play with the Steam people?
Yeah, it's all the same stuff.
Oh, so they all run off the same servers, essentially.
Yeah.
That's great. So you recommend Steam. There's itch, but you recommend Steam, correct?
Yes. The build system is nicer there.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds really great. All right. So 0K is developed with the Spring engine. Why that engine?
Well, essentially that's because where it started, there was never an engine choice. 0K as a game, and previously it was called Complete Annihilation before it sort of renamed. It's, been a game in motion this whole time. It's always been playable. So it started as a fork of Balanced Annihilation, and then it was playable from then on the Spring engine. So there was never a choice where we went, okay, we're going to make a game. What engine do we pick? It just was on that engine. So it was never selected. And also it was 2007, so there weren't many game engines around regardless.
Oh.
But otherwise, I wouldn't switch for any other engine, even ignoring the monumental task, because Spring does everything we want. It's a really powerful engine which does a lot of high-level RTS stuff, as in it does networking, which I've never had to worry about. The concept of units exists, selection queues, unit targeting, weapon physics, terrain, there's, the maps exist. Yeah, it does most, pathfinding. Yeah, orders, networking, replays, save games. It just does it, pretty much. Already. So you don't have to spend the first, whatever it is, 80% of the development even making the engine work. It also has deep Lua integration, so you can customize most of whatever it's doing. And finally, it's also open source. So this is why 0K's open source, because it grew out of the open source Spring community. There's a lot of Linux people in it. So it means that you're never sort of stuck with Spring as well. If there's a problem, which we really have to solve, we can go upstream and edit the engine, which I've done sometimes. And yeah, make a contribution, it gets built, and you can have your fix. So yeah, if you're really stuck, open source lets you, pick it up and take it. But we haven't had to do that. And, well, Bar's sort of doing that a bit. Actually, Bar's really pushing engine development. They're hoping to merge back in, but I'm not sure what's happening there. But for me, for 0K, we really have to edit the engine very rarely. I haven't edited it or built it in like 4 years, probably. Maybe longer than 4 years. Yeah, not since Steam. So yeah, there's that safety behind it, but it's all done in Lua, essentially, when you actually want to make a game on top of it.
Huh. So you could move it off of Spring if you need to?
No, that would be basically remaking the whole game somewhere else. Yeah, because the engine just does so much.
Okay, so Spring pretty much has everything in the box that you would need for an RTS, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think you'd have to do a few things if you wanted a game which was more like stop and shoot. Like if you want to make StarCraft, I think you'd want to go into the engine and change a few things about how units stop and how they sort of bump against each other when they stop. Because Spring really, it was like what was it? It started as the TA demo recorder, I think, where demo is like the old demo scene word. Wow. So it could run replays from TA in 3D, I think was the original pitch.
Wow.
So, and then they decided, well, we've got this, we've got all this code we've written from scratch to try and do what TA does. Let's just expand it so you can make games in it. you could certainly make like Supreme Commander, fairly well. It has a similar, underlying structure of TA, right?
Yeah.
For other things, C and Siege probably not too hard, but yeah, you'd have to tweak a few things, I reckon, to actually make it a fully generic engine.
Okay. That's really great. Yeah, this Spring engine sounds amazing. So, well, thank you for that explanation. I would have not known otherwise. So how is pathfinding handled?
Well, yeah, basically what I said. Spring does it. I've put some lure on top to tweak it to my liking. So to tweak it, tweak what happens when you tell a whole bunch of units to move to a location and then queue an order somewhere else, rather than go in there and then bubbling around, or they try and get to that point and then go here. They sort of go as a group now, which is nice. But yeah, basically Spring does the heavy lifting, and you can put a bit of lure on top if you want. Spring exposes a lot, so you can send in lure of raw move command, or you can just send move commands, which aren't commands not commands, which are just orders to the unit AI itself to say this is the move goal, and Spring just says, okay, I'm going to pathfind to that move goal. So stuff like that, it's the lure is in a lot of it, right? You can do a lot with it. Although I have looked under the hood, and you can see in the debug mode, it's actually some kind of hierarchical A star. So there's pathfinding grids, and it says, okay, I want to go from here to here. I've got an approximate idea of how to do that with this sort of high-level grid. And then when I get close to each of my nodes, I'm going to delve deeper and say, okay, this is how exactly to get from here to here. And then I'll delve even deeper and say exactly how to get here to here. There's actually a good Factorio Friday Facts, the Factorio blog. Somewhere around about Factorio Friday Facts 330, 340. This is just me remembering which year I read this. Going through how the Factorio people came up with a similar solution, hierarchical A star type thing for some of their lag problems with biter pathfinding, which, and they've got some good pictures and explanations. And I was reading that and thought, hey, that's, basically what Spring does. That's pretty cool. So basically pathfinding is handled by it working. I haven't had any problems recently, within the last 5 or so years. Units respond pretty well, and they usually take the path you'd expect. So that's basically what you want from pathfinding, really.
Does 0K have a lore? And if so, tell us about it.
Yeah. Sort of. Well, essentially it does now, but we had this gist of this lore. So it's an open source thing where, people would write little bits of lore and what they think the lore should be. And the problem with this is that you can write a bit of lore, but until it sort of ends up somewhere which is fleshed out or on a wiki or, even in game in some kind of mission, it's really hard for it to be stick. So the gist of the lore is there's a galaxy full of robots, eons in the future, facing the heat death of the universe. 0K, nothing is cooler.
Oh.
The robots were created by the humans to fight their wars, but the humans probably aren't around anymore in most sort of iterations of the lore, and the robots are fighting each other on some various form of autopilot. So there's been some variations. We've had lore in Planet Wars, which is an online sort of risk-style campaign where you fight on individual planets in multiplayer battles, which has usually had lore about various humans or AI or mixes of humans AI factions fighting each other for control of this galaxy. It'd be good to run Planet Wars again, but it hasn't run in a while because we need a lot more free time from Litro or someone who can do server development. The single-player campaign actually was made with this lore in mind, this sort of idea in mind. But when it was made, there was nobody around to really write it. So the writings actually come in later based on the sort of structure. We had a player, Thor Neal, who fleshed out the lore within the campaign framework, which I quite enjoyed proofreading. So yeah, that's sort of the setting. There's robots, humans aren't really around. They fight each other.
Okay. All right. So that's where the name 0K came from, the heat death of the universe. I had no idea. So that makes the lore a whole lot more interesting than I thought because, well, humanity's gone, but here are some robots that we left behind, and they're just fighting because they're programmed to fight. Kind of.
Yeah, usually.
That's kind of the gist of it.
Oh, yeah. The name 0K comes from like numerous suggestion threads and developer polls and stuff. I think we ended up with the best name that we were selecting from. But nowadays, I might have gone with a more generic name, like something with battle in the name, or something with maybe not commander, like a bit on the nose, but like Planetary Annihilation, right? It's just X Annihilation. If they can make a whole game called X Annihilation, maybe we should have.
I don't know. Maybe you could put a poll out for a name change. Maybe your community might be, you're good. You're stuck with it.
We're done with name changes for sure. And, we've got good Google rankings. We had a book come along about cryogenics, which sort of was fighting us on Google for a bit. Google ratings. There was a book about cryogenics called 0K.
Really?
And
cryogenics, so like freezing heads
exactly, right.
and freezing bodies? Oh my goodness.
So we were fighting the Google rankings a bit. Oh, actually, the funniest thing is I think someone got sent some like sanitary, what are those disposable alcohol wipes called 0K wipes because they're cold, right? They feel cold.
Yeah.
Someone who was running Twitter at the time, like had one of those corporate Twitter interactions and got sent some of these wipes, and that was really funny as well.
I wish it had one of your little robots on the wipes. That'd make it so much better. That is pretty interesting, actually, because the name 0K is fighting with all these other entities. Good luck. Hope you win. I hope you win.
In the RTS space, so it's pretty good.
You're the only in the RTS. But, well, I mean, it'd be kind of foolish for another game company to be like, we're 0K now when you're already like so established. You've been around since 2000, when? 7?
2010 was the name change. So we were a complete Annihilation before that.
Okay.
Because we were a fork from Balanced Annihilation, which was a fork of Absolute Annihilation. So, we figured the ABC. We'll continue that trend.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll have another fork and you'll call yourself something Battle whatever. I don't know. Battle Commanders.
Yeah, we've got a mod actually called Future Wars, which has got a lot of work into it as well.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, as in, this is a mod made by Shaman mostly. He's a guy in the community.
Okay.
Who seems to be adding a whole bunch of, it's sort of doing the fork thing again. It's adding a whole bunch of mechanics. It's adding like these laser guided missiles. It's adding a whole bunch of, what are they called? Like when you've got a swarm of missiles that launch and they then fly in a pattern and do set particular things or home into things. He's basically, it's a bit of a sandbox, a bit of a extension. He's added a lot more ability students, I think. Yeah, so it's cool to see that happen. As in, I haven't worked on it and only had to look at it a bit, so I don't know exactly what's going on.
People say that RTS kind of live and die by their mods, right? I mean, that's great. You have a modder that keeps your game like alive. Lots of people like other RTS games. They didn't last from 2010 because they don't have a modding community. You know what I mean? So I think that's really great that someone's doing that.
Yeah. Well, we can trace back to TA because it came out of modding in the beginning. I think the TA mod was Uberhack, which is a mod for TA. Which, if you're a TA player, you probably know what Uberhack is.
I don't think
I've played it.
I was a TA player, but I don't know what Uberhack is. I remember doing like Star Wars, like putting like different types of skins on my characters, having different like new tech levels and stuff. That was really fun. But what is this mod you're talking about?
I'm not sure. As in, it's sort of the missing link. It's the between apes and humans or something. So I've just heard of it, right? There's this TA, Uberhack, Absolute Annihilation, which was then, I think, ported to Spring, which then turned to Balanced Annihilation, which turned to Complete Annihilation.
Wasn't there something in between that, even like 3D Annihilation?
I haven't heard of that one. There is a TA 3D
that's
engine.
what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
A TA 3D engine is a completely separate thing. That's more of a very much, we're implementing exactly TA, and you can play things on it. It's sort of like Spring if it didn't decide to become more general and become a more wider RTS engine. I don't know much about TA3D though, actually, so don't quote me on that.
Huh. All right. Well, that really forked. Our conversation forked from what we had planned out. So let's get back on track, shall we?
Yeah.
So, how many factions are there in 0K?
Yes, this is another one of those sort of tricky questions. Technically, there's one faction, but it plays like there are 11. Although some of these factions, like 3 of them, are fairly specialized to the map or take on more of a support role. So essentially what happens is where other games have factions, 0K has factories. We price factories as tech structures. So a factory is like your spire in StarCraft that lets you build mutalisks. It's not like your hatchery that makes you able to build more mutalisks. So in Spin Commander, I know at least the tier 1 factories, you build them to increase your production speed, right? Whereas in 0K, they're all sort of priced expensively. And this means that the factory you pick is sort of like your faction. Each factory has about 10 units that cover most of the roles and are balanced most like you would a faction. So you expect people to be able to make a factory and somebody else makes a different factory and to have a decent 1v1 with them. And 10 units is about the average number of units you'd find in a faction for like StarCraft or Command & Conquer. So that's a sort of a good midpoint, really. Yeah, so in the game, your first factory is free. Your commanders have like a factory plop token over their heads, which they make the first factory for free with, which gets rid of the like walking around putting down metal extractors and power generators and whatever that we sort of decided to skip for other games like TA and PA and Subcom and things. So your first factory is free, and you plop it down, and that's sort of your faction for most, some of the game. By the mid game, people like to add another factory, usually a support factory, which will be something which deals with the terrain they're facing, like spiders or something, or has a particular unit they think they really need, or more like planes or gunships, because planes and gunships aren't really balanced to be ploppable in 1v1, but they're really good for support because they add a whole extra dimension and speedy support, which is quite good. People will often go for Striders as well as a second or third tech, which is a 12th non-free factory full of sort of big units. And it's very rare to see 4 or more factories in a 1v1 because they're just sort of expensive enough that you don't really want to spend much on them unless you have a particular strategy in mind to combine this unit from this factory and this unit from this other factory and do a thing with them. So this is sort of a soft faction system, right? You're always 700 metal away from getting anything, but you don't really need to spend the 700 metal because you've got your own factory and you'd rather have units from it than take into a new thing, except when you do want to. So there's a lot of choices to make there, and it's really like a build your own faction system by the time you get through it, because you've put together these few factories with all the units from them and you're now doing stuff with them. Yeah, in team games though, so this is 1v1, you sort of build up to maybe 3 or 4 factories by the end of a long game. In team games, factories are more like your role within a team. So there's 11 of them. You can start at a support factory in a team game because you might be having more of a support role. So you'll plop down your factory on some front, and you'll probably, people tell you which factories they're going to be making just by you seeing their command queues at the start of the game. So you can try and spread around your factories reasonably easily between the team, and that gives everyone a bit of a unique role within the team, because certain factories do certain things well, have certain units that do certain things well. And I think this is really part of what makes big team games possible, in a sense, because everyone's got their own thing they do. Factories are built around a bit of a theme, a move type, or some strengths and weaknesses, to try and make them into unique factions, essentially. This is really where a lot of the unit wackiness comes in with some of the sort of heavier factories. So some factories will be good on smaller maps, some will be good on larger maps, or hillier fronts or flatter fronts in a team game. we try to fill the matchmaker with maps that have a lot of viable factories. And if you pick one of the more sort of central factories, you should be able to play it on, I think, pretty much all the maps. Although if you try and specialize in something which is a bit more out there, then maybe you have to pick something else for some other maps. Or you can just use the ban system in the matchmaker pool, which is fine. So we recommend people start with cloak bots or shield bots because they're sort of reasonably generalist, reasonably cheap, and pretty good everywhere. They're walking robots that can walk up hills that are designed to synergize with their particular mechanics. So cloak bots have some cloaking units. Their constructor has an area cloak field he can turn on, which cloaks things nearby. And they're sort of a bit glass cannony because cloaking is like that, a bit speedy. Shield bots are based around these sort of personal bubble shields. They've got one on their constructor, on their assault unit, and on the felon, which is a very weird unit that drains shield charge to deal damage. And they're also built around being able to sort of ball up in these shield balls and really support each other. So their units are a bit less generalist than the cloaky bots. But they're all sort of reasonably cheap and have decent-ish speed and can go up hills, so they're pretty good everywhere. Then we've got spiders and jump bots, which are heavier, a bit more specialized, a bit slower, but good in hilly areas. So the spider bot factory can go up and down all these hills, right? Everything can walk on all terrain. So that's really great. There's a lot of cliffs, right? You can abuse the cliffs and go places. Jump bots are a bit weirder. About half their units have this jump jet ability, which is this manual command you give, and you can line move them, whatever, and everything to jump over anything really. You can jump over cliffs, but they also use it in combat to escape or to jump in. And they're also filled with a bunch of weird units. That's sort of the janky factory, or the jankiest factory. Probably, you can start them in 1v1, but they're not necessarily balanced there. They're probably kept a little bit underpowered just so that they don't break everything. We're working on it, but it's taken time to get all these factories really viable and startable against each other. Then that was sort of the four main bot factories. Then we've got Rover and the tank factory, which are vehicle factories. They are a bit speedier, they can go fast, they are bad at hills. And the difference there really is that Rover is like light vehicles and the tanks are the heavy vehicles. So Rover you'll find sort of speedier, lighter vehicles that can go places. Tanks got these, tanky tanks and heavy artillery and things like that. They're really interesting because they are startable in 1v1. And the gameplay is really quite different with them because they've got reasonably expensive units. They've got some raiders and they've got a heavy constructor which is armed because you can't really spread your relatively expensive raiders everywhere. But they're quite an interesting factory to get working. Then we've got Amphbot and Hover, which are factories where everyone can move across the sea. Amph is slow and tanky and walks underwater, while Hover is quick and tends to be glass cannons and can fly across the sea. We've got gunships and planes, who are air factories. The gunships hover in place and fire and stuff and have air transports and zappy gunships and things. The giant flying fortress, sort of very standard air in a way. While planes are scouts, fighters and bombers. And the plane factory in particular is not really one you plop to start with in a 1v1 because it doesn't have raiders or things. You can bomb things and raid in that way, but every factory has anti-air, so it's usually not so good to plop gunships and planes at the start because your opponent can build anti-air. And we like to keep it that way because when you have gunships and planes in the mix, sort of in the meta for the 1v1 starts, you can get some silly things going on where gunships are good on this map here because it's a big map. We like to keep it all sort of that's something we've given up on, making gunships and planes. I think you can plop because it just doesn't make the meta any good. And then finally we've got the ship factory, which is restricted to the sea. It should win a head-to-head fight against Hover and Amph, but of course it's limited to the sea. So it's got that disadvantage. It's got good sort of sea bombardment abilities. It's got quite a few roles and units, actually, more raiders than other factories because we sort of expect a 1v1 in sea to be ship against ship to start with, and then you add on Hover or Amphbot or gunship or plane as a support factory. Because each of these factories do things that ships can't do. But yeah, and that's the summary. And then we've got Striders, of course, which are the heavy bots. But that's basically what the factories do.
So heavy bots, are they big, giant bots, or
The Striders are big, heavy bots. The factory isn't free and doesn't have the usual roles. It's essentially just a list of heavy bots you can build from sort of medium expensive to super expensive.
Ah, so you wouldn't start with those. I mean, you couldn't start with those because they're not free, right?
No, you'd be spending the 700. It's called the Strider Hub. It costs the same amount as other factories, so you often switch into it. But yeah, it's a factory where if you started it, you could make a heavy unit in like 8 minutes or 5 minutes or something, and then your opponent would have the rest of the map, and they would be able to surround and kill your low and heavy bot because it really wants light units to support it.
Oh, okay. All right. So it's pretty cool balance, actually. So your Strider is like your tech 1.5 or a tech 2, or there's no
more like 1.5.
1.5. So it's like a stronger bot, but it does need support because it's big and heavy and slow, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. That's cool. That's real cool. All right. Well, thank you for explaining all that. Because when I play 0K, I don't really know exactly what to put down, but now I know what you
Here's
recommend.
the trick to 0K.
Tell us.
All the construction menus are designed so that the thing in the top left, or the things around the top left, are probably the simple, basic good things. Not good in terms of other things are bad, but the simpler stuff. So we've got cloak and shield bot there. We've got metal extractors and basic energy generators there. We've got small turrets there. We've got radar there.
So things you would recommend to start with.
Yeah, the constructors and the raiders and factory build menus are there, and then the weird stuff's in the bottom right.
Oh, okay. I like that. All right. Well, that's really good game design there. I mean, that's good HUD design, UI design right there.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. Well, thank you for that. Let's move on, shall we? So tell us a little bit about your campaign. You mentioned the campaign, so tell us about it.
Yeah, okay. So the campaign uses that lore from earlier a bit. It takes place in a galaxy where the humans have mysteriously disappeared. The player is a human commander pilot, so commanders are piloted by people, and then they have they generate their sort of robot armies under these commanders. I'm sure there's robot commanders as well, but this is a human pilot commander. So they survived, frozen and undisturbed on some edge of the galaxy, and apparently fine, and then they woke up. So the campaign involves you're this commander, this pilot trying to figure out what happened. You're traveling around the galaxy in a sprawling web of missions, fighting the robots that are left behind, or allying with some and fighting others in big matches, taking their tech, and then finding out what happened. Unearthing codex logs to find out what happened and what's going on. So one of the main goals of the campaign was, what you were just saying, that there's a lot of units and structures and things. So we wanted to gradually introduce people to these units and structures, similar to what the base campaigns of StarCraft and Warcraft 3 did. You'd start off with like footmen and riflemen or something, and then you'd work your way up to the whole tech tree. So the thing about that is that StarCraft has about 10 units per faction. So there's about as many units to fit in 10 missions for each faction. But each 0K factory has as many units as a StarCraft faction. So we've got about 120 units and a few dozen structures. So we ended up needing, when we planned this all out, we needed about 70 campaign missions, which is, a lot to do. So, and also, it's very hard to weave a narrative or something through 70 missions in a line. So, and this doesn't make sense to in terms of the way that 0K works even. It doesn't, why would you unlock these 70 units and these 70 missions in these particular order when you might really like this factory, which is later in the campaign? What we did is we made a web. There's a bit like a Risk style map where you walk around the galaxy. You start off in a bit of a line just to introduce people, sort of tutorialize, but there's this web on the galaxy, and you conquer a planet and it opens up new planets behind it. And you conquer a planet, opens up new planets behind it. And each mission you beat, the missions are, sort of StarCraft-esque in the sense that they'll introduce you to this unit, which you don't have, and show, be a mission which is sort of geared towards this unit being good. This is the situation, you might want to do this. Here's the objective. Here's a unit which is good for this objective. And then you do the mission, get the objective, whatever it happens to be, and then you unlock the unit, or maybe a few units around it. And now you can use those units wherever else you want. So it's very non-linear in that sense. You could go over here and get this factory and then use it on this other area which you've sort of neglected. And this allows us to introduce some units, but not do any in any particular order. We fitted the factories to zones in the galaxy. So this zone might be the hovercraft zone. This zone might be the rover zone. And you'll fight rovers, learn how to use rovers and beat rovers. And then if you take over the whole zone, you'll end up with being able to plop the factory in any mission and build all its units. We've got the simpler and the harder factories, or the simpler and the sort of weirder, heavier factories. We just put the simpler ones towards the left of the galaxy where you start, and the harder, weirder ones are on the right. So that's basically how we do it. I'm quite happy with it. We had to make a whole sort of framework to make these missions fairly quickly, and the feedback's been pretty good, so I wouldn't really change much. We do tweak missions, especially the early missions, in response to feedback, reasonably often, because that's sort of where you hook people right in the first few missions. And we also have to, if we add a unit or tweak something, we might have to go back to a mission and say, okay, we'll put this unit in this mission now and sort of tweak it slightly. But it's very resilient as well to change. So we can update the game and then not have to go back and touch the campaign all the time. And this is all running with the AI, so the AI takes care of a lot of the changes. It's not scripted based on units doing particular things.
All right. Well, I like that idea of introducing the player to the basic units and then slowly working them up to the more heavier units. That's great. I mean, that's just the way it needs to be done, right? So keep that up. I love it. I played a little bit of the campaign, and I enjoyed it. I need to get back into it, but I really did enjoy what I played. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that's good. And of course, you do a similar thing for the structures, right? Light turrets over here. Yeah. And then we've got, I think we've got 3 giant super weapons, and they are like, here's the set piece giant super weapon mission for finishing off 3 sort of arcs of the storyline as well.
So are these super weapons like usable in 1v1?
Okay. Technically, yes, usable in 1v1, except they're very big. They're more like they're the kinds of things you see in free-for-alls and maybe in a long team game sometimes. But yeah, they're fully buildable things. They're not just we made a super weapon for the campaign mission.
So what are these super weapons?
Okay, so there's going from cheapest to most expensive for the moment. The costs change a bit. There's a lot of feedback from like the free-for-all community about which one should be cheaper or more expensive. There's the Disco Rave Party, which is the silliest name, but it's the least silly super weapon. So it's this structure with a cannon on a wheel with 6 guns coming out of it, and each gun fires a different color projectile. It goes red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, based on a bunch of mechanics we've got. So red just fires, essentially it's a projectile that hits and its attack nuke just explodes. Orange, what does orange do? I think orange makes the big fireball. We've got a napalm missile. It just makes like a big napalm missile, does a bunch of fire damage to everything in over like 30 seconds. Yellow, I think, deals a bunch of impulse. So it hits something and things fly away. Green terraforms. So green, you hit something, the map gets smoothed. So if you make a terraform fort, it might smooth out. If it hits a cliff might turn to a ramp, stuff like that. Blue is EMP, because blue is the color of EMP in this game. Consistently hits a thing, everything gets stunned. Good for disabling stuff. And purple is a slow wave. So it slows things down in this sort of big expanding wave. You point it somewhere and it fires over the map, and then a bunch of things happen in that area and stuff dies.
Oh.
Then we have the Zenith, which summons meteors at some rate from the sky. They float down from ages in the sky. Meteors come in, and float around its big, ominous sort of meteor gathering beam. And then you tell it to fire somewhere, and all the meteors turn around and coalesce and fire at this area, and stuff in that area dies. And then you can reclaim the meteors for metal, because as we know, it's a big business reclaiming meteors for metal. So I guess you could also farm with it, but the meteors don't have much reclaim in them at the moment. So yeah, you fire it somewhere and it dies. People think this is the worst super weapon at the moment because it has to charge up and it doesn't quite do enough damage. But we're constantly tweaking these things. Then there's the Starlight, which is the most expensive super weapon at, I think, 45,000 at the moment. The Disco Rave Party is like 36,000. And what it does is it launches this satellite above itself, and then it shoots a beam up at the satellite, which bounces off the satellite, and the satellite can change its angle and its pitch such that this giant laser beam kills things, basically. So it's this slowly moving beam that moves around the map, wherever you point it, and deals like 2,000 damage a second, I think, which is quite high. Factories commanders have 4,000-ish hit points. So there's this beam going around like a laser pointer, swiping through things. And also every 20 seconds it fires this beam that makes a massive hole in the map. Just fires down and there's no more map anymore. And the laser pointer also deforms. So you end up with these nice patterns when there's lots of starlights around. There's actually a really good recent video of a free-for-all, which is about like a 2-hour free-for-all where people built a bunch of starlights, but then ended up being assassinated by, giant robots or by tech nukes or whatever else. And it's really, it's a sped up video of about 10 minutes where these starlights are moving around and looking at stuff. You can actually counter them, of course. Super weapons are hard to counter, but you can counter them a little bit by cloaking your army or putting your army under a radar jammer, and then really making sure your air coverage is so that your army can't get scouted. Because if they can't see exactly where you are, they're going to have trouble, honing on your units. But yeah, super weapons are, though, designed to end games, and they're really good sort of mutually assured destruction things in free-for-all.
Everybody likes the super weapons in these type of games. Like, seriously, I'm so glad to hear that you have at least 3 of them, and they sound awesome. Like, I've never really heard of the disco ball being like the disco ball type weapon. Like, I've never really heard of something with a variety of lasers. That's very interesting and very fun. So you got a lot of, and then the meteor thing, that's really cool. And I think my favorite one is the Starlight. I mean, who doesn't like to, shoot giant holes in a map? I mean, that sounds really just fun as hell. So yeah.
This has been the strength of the open source sort of community stuff. The Starlight was added like 2008 when the like firing my laser meme was a thing, and it originally was like an untextured box and a sprite of the Malaysia guy. Right? And it eventually got remodeled, made serious-ish. So yeah, this kind of stuff, people just add things they find fun in, and then you can use the raw material and make a whole game out of it, in a sense.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad that somebody memed your game, and now it's so much more fun now. Well, thank you for that. Awesome. How is the game played? Is it Unit X counters Unit Y, and Unit Z counters Unit X?
Yes, sort of. As in, there's been a lot of, have you seen the Wayward Strategy article about hard and soft counter systems? I'm not sure whether I'd actually call this a hard or a soft counter system, because we have counters, but it's also a lot to do with tactics and positioning. You can reverse them if the other army's in a really bad spot. So, for example, we've got Riots and Raiders. Riots are slow, short-range glass cannon units designed to protect things from Raiders, which are speedy, fragile, and cheap. So if you've got some artillery, someone could just run Raiders at it, right? The artillery will fire too slowly or too inaccurately to hit the Raiders very, very much, and then all the artillery will die. You spend a lot on it. So you put some Riots around it, and they, are the bodyguards. So a wall of Riot, and this changes, the balance of them changes depending on where you are in the game. You don't start the game with Riots because you move slowly across the map. The other guy raids the rest of your expansions, and then they build something which counters riots by the time your riots even get there. So, but on the balance of these two, a wall of riots will destroy similarly priced, or maybe even up to like 2 or 3 times the cost of raiders, depending exactly on what the riots and raiders are, because there's a lot of leeway within these roles. They'll destroy a bunch of raiders coming at them, right? The raiders shouldn't be doing that. But if the raiders sort of surround an overwhelm a group of riots, they can avoid the AoE damage that riots deal. They can sort of cut them off. So if you surround a bunch of riots, you can actually go in and often kill them and maybe make, at least a decent trade. So it's a soft counter system in that sense, but it's also hard in that we've got, anti-air is pretty good against aircraft. So these roles can be pretty loose. It's more of a guideline, and there's a lot of variation within roles and a lot of matchups between individual units. We've got about 8-ish defined roles maybe, so, raider or riot and assault, skirmisher, which is like long-range kiter, artillery, anti-air, then bombers and fighters and things. So the roles are a bit of a guide, and also they correspond to sort of the position in the factory. So if you press W as the hotkey in the factory, you'll get a raider. If you press E, you'll get a skirmisher fairly often. So there's that. And also on the counter system, we don't use damage multipliers to create this structure. So with this back to our physical properties and things, we rely on those. So artillery doesn't deal reduced damage against raiders or assaults. It probably fires so slowly, or so with such burst that it isn't sort of worth using it against small units. So we prefer to use like stats such as health and damage and speed and turn rate and projectile speed and spread and whether it homes or not. This is a lot. You can see this a lot with skirmishers. They're sort of medium range units, which they're the Z in your X, Y, Z. Skirmishers counter riots because they're about the same speed, maybe even faster sometimes. They have range enough to outrange riots, but they don't counter raiders. Raiders counter skirmishers because raiders are fast enough to dodge the slow skirmisher projectiles and fast enough to get in range and kill the skirmishers. So actually someone's made a mod recently, which is just 3 Cloakbot units, Reaver, Ronin, and Glaive, which are the riot, the skirmisher, and the raider. And I watched a game of this, and there was actually quite a bit going on, because you'd try and make the skirmishers to shoot down the defenses, and then you'd protect them with Reavers, and then raiders would come in. So there's a lot going on even with those 3 units.
I really dig that, because the count, like you said, it's soft counters, so it's not a hard counter. So it's like they don't absolutely annihilate them just because of a multiplier. There's still positioning to think about. So if your rioters get up in all the skirmishers, your skirmishers still might lose.
Yeah, you could air transport. The old Reaver drop. You air transport some things into their base, and suddenly the whole speed problem with riots is not a problem, and they annihilate a base. Or if the skirmishers are defending something and the riots come at them, the skirmishers, their battle plan is to walk away, but that means that whatever they're defending is going to have a problem. So then you've got that as well.
Makes sense. I dig it. I dig that. I like that it's not like 100%. You know what I mean? Like, skirmishers don't always counter rioters, but they're good against them. Yeah. So it's not like rock, paper, scissors, but it's more like, we recommend you use this against it, but you're not guaranteed to win due to positioning and
in a general strategic way, do this, but maybe tactically this other thing was slightly better.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Exactly. I dig that a lot. So let's move forward. We already talked a little bit. We already mentioned this, but let's get more in depth with this. Tell us about overdriving mexes. How is it done?
Okay, so as we touched on, overdrive is basically a way of spending metal to increase your metal income without taking more territory. So it fills the role of metal makers, right? You spend metal on energy power generators and metal makers to get more metal, or mex upgrades. You don't need any more territory to upgrade your mexes, if there are mexes to upgrade. So an unfortunate thing is it's a lot simpler to do than it is to explain, which is maybe fortunate, but it's a bit hard to explain sometimes. To do it, all you really need to do is build energy structures near metal extractors and then have excess energy, so overbuild power to cause the energy to go into your metal extractors to make more metal. And then pay attention to the color of your energy grid. So there's a conversion ratio which sort of changes, but this is communicated by whether your grid is like red or green. If it's green, build some more energy structures. It's probably going to give you a good payback. If it's red, well, go and put more in the grid. There's also tooltips in energy structures that tell you how much time it'll take them to pay back on average, which is quite good. So the way it actually works is every MEX has the ability to drain energy to multiply its income with diminishing returns. So a MEX that drains 16 energy doubles its income. A MEX that drains 64 energy triples its income. There's just it's just like square root of energy on 4 or something like that. I always forget which way the parentheses go with the square root. But it's just a square root doubling, tripling, or whatever the income. And it's a smooth curve within these. So you can put 32.5 energy into a MEX and it'll increase its income by somewhere between 2 times and 3 times. The aim of this system, so why do we have this? The aim is to keep the territory important throughout the game. So our problem with metal makers is that eventually, due to the nature of exponential income, of exponential returns, whatever you do with metal makers, you can make them. You can really nerf metal makers to make them not impact very many games, but then they're really bad to build at the start of the game. Just due to the nature of exponential returns, metal makers will be really bad, and then at some point just completely eclipse the income you get from metal extractors. So once this happens, once the metal extractors have way less income than your metal makers, the income of each side is really decoupled from the territory they control. So you can get into these really, really stalematey games where this side might have most of the map, but the other side has metal makers. So it just keeps going up and up, and there's no end in sight. So that's our problem with metal makers. We spend a lot of time in 2007, 2008 just experimenting with different systems. For example, like MEX upgrades, they don't suffer from this problem so much, but we found them a bit fiddly, right? To go around and upgrade all your MEXs is a bit annoying. And when do you unlock MEX upgrades, stuff like that? Do they drain energy, etc.? So we try stuff like that and then settle on this system. So the important part of this system is the diminishing returns. So mathematically, if you split energy between a larger number of MEXs than a smaller number, the diminishing returns for each MEX means that the overall metal income will be greater, right? Because each of the metal extractors will be spending less energy, giving it a better energy to metal conversion ratio. So you want as many metal extractors as possible to link to your energy. And this all happens automatically. You don't have to go to each MEX and say, okay, I'm going to set this little value for how much you overdrive. The total energy for overdrive from the whole team is based on the current storage and the net income. So if you've got 75% storage and your income is 100, 75% energy will go to overdrive. And the way energy storage works is people usually max out their energy storage and all their excess goes to overdrive. So that's, it's all fine. And then the MEXs themselves solve the equation essentially to distribute the energy between themselves to maximize the metal output, which is important for maps with smaller or larger metal spots, because taking a larger metal spot and then overdriving it to multiply the income is better than, overdriving a small one, proportionally, which actually makes some interesting map design, because you can put, big metal extractors in the middle, which you really want to overdrive. But of course, you have to put energy near them to overdrive, which is dangerous. Which I guess I haven't mentioned that yet. But energy has to be placed near MEXs in a grid for the overdrive to work, essentially. The grid is this very simple thing, which is just, you've got circles around all your metal extractors and all your energy generators. And if the circles touch, they're in the same grid. So it's just lines of extractors and power generators and pylons linked by chains of proximity. And all the grid does for overdrive, all it does is it limits the total energy drain of the MEXs by the total energy income of what's in the grid. So it's this very simple, limit, which doesn't happen most of the time, except if you expand to a MEX and there's no energy near it, well, it's not getting overdrive. So this creates some interesting decision points, actually. Do you make an expensive but efficient energy generator in your base and overdrive a bit of stuff and then maybe make some pylons to spread that overdrive? Or do you put cheap energy structures out in your territory where it's dangerous to get this small sort of most efficient step of overdrive from them at the start? And I quite like this sort of midpoint between energy being, you can place it anywhere and it does whatever. But if you really want to optimize stuff, maybe you want to put some energy structures outside. And it makes some nice sim bases, right? Because you put some energy structures between your mexes and stuff looks nice, right? It's not just put energy wherever you want, doesn't matter, may as well stick it in this corner of the map. Although it's not as prescribed as like the adjacency system, which is also nice, I think.
All right. So what you really do is you have a mass extractor and you put an energy structure next to it, and if it's in the circle, it gets overdriven, correct?
Yeah. But it's this chain of circles, right? You can have a big power network. It's not that you have to put all the energy structures next to the metal extractor. It's that you have to bring it into the same grid.
So you got to connect the circles? You got to connect the circles?
And the overdrive, yeah, you have to have these sort of a chain of circles to wherever.
Oh, okay.
And the overdrive only happens. It's not like an automatic adjacency thing. It only actually happens if you spend energy. Like if you have excess energy income, and it goes to that. So it's not sort of this sort of, I don't know, is it mandatory, this free thing where the extractor gets better? It's allowing it to spend energy to make itself better.
Right, that makes sense. And I've noticed a lot of these type of commander-based games, you're always having excess energy anyway, so you might as well use it for something. So I think that's a really good solution for that, and it just makes it easier for your mexes to kind of upgrade.
Well, they've all got this kind of thing, with metal makers or spending power on your metal, tier 2 metal mines or mass extractors, metal extractors. And so this overdrive essentially, does the basic choice. The basic choice you're making with economies in all these games is how much metal do I want to spend now to make more metal later? And the overdrive system does that really seamlessly. You just, say you've got your balanced metal and energy. Oh, I'll make a fusion plant. That'll give me 35 more energy. Since I'm balanced, that'll go to overdrive. In TA, you would say, okay, I've got some metal I want to spend. Let's spend it on this power plant and this metal metal maker or mass fabricator, I think they're called. And then in some ratio, these two will make me more energy. Will make me more metal. So we've really just, cut out the middleman essentially and said, here's the decision you want to make. You want to spend X more on making your income bigger. You can just spend X and it happens.
Okay. That's great. I like that system. That's a good system.